Hi, welcome to Jeff Talks. It's just like TED Talks, except I'm Jeff, so I'm going to talk. I thought I would start to tell some stories about my life and some things that I've been telling people for years and try to get it down on video and, kind of preserve it or let everybody hear it or comment on it or laugh or cry or whatever. So the first one is today, July 28th, is the birthday of my brother. My brother David would have been 56 today. And like that picture I posted on Facebook, uh, you know, that's what we looked like in those days. And that was our first apartment in 1058 Walton Avenue. I thought I would tell the story about the day, or actually the morning and the day that he was born, because it is really kind of a funny story, and it explains a lot about the times and about what was going on in our life, I guess, in those days. So basically, that spring and summer, as my mother began to show, and everybody knew that she was expecting, as they called it in those days, because you couldn't say pregnant. People would ask me if I wanted a brother or a sister, and I wanted a brother because I already had a sister. And but you got to understand that in those days they didn't teach us anything. Here, my mother was going to have a baby, but I was kind of like thinking about a stalk. To be honest with you, I had no idea, and the fact that it was in her belly, I knew it was going to come out of her belly, but again, I had no concept. I did not know she was going to be going to the hospital. I did not know she wasn't going to be home. I didn't know anything. Uh, I doubt they told us, but if they did, they didn't tell us enough so that we understood. So, tra la 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 la, it's coming to the end of July, and my mother's getting bigger and bigger, and people, she's saying any day, and we don't know from nothing. Now, as an aside to the story, my mother's mother, we called her Bubby. Her name was Dora. Lived on the other side of the Bronx. And to be honest with you, we didn't have a really strong relationship with her. And I'm not really entirely sure why. It wasn't an easy commute to go from one side of the Bronx to the other, so until my mother drove. And then obviously my grandmother didn't drive. She could barely speak English, and she couldn't read or write much. So unless she was driven or picked up, she didn't come back and forth. So I didn't have a real great relationship. And on top of that, she didn't really speak English. I mean, she spoke broken English Yiddish mixed up with other things. I mean, I got to understand her as I grew up, but at that point, I really didn't know her that well. Whose fault is that? I don't know. It just was. So anyway, so one morning on July 28th, 1961, I wake up to my sister crying and a woman who I came to realize was my grandmother yelling at her in some kind of broken English Yiddish to stop crying. I get out of bed. Now, mind you, my birthday is in September, so I wasn't even 8 years old yet. I was like what you'd call 7 3/4. So I go in, and my sister has a nosebleed. She's bleeding from her nose, and my grandmother is yelling at her to make her stop it, which always kind of surprised me because she raised 3 kids. I didn't understand that, and to this very day, I still don't. But having had many nosebleeds in my life at that point, I knew exactly what to do. I looked around. I went and got a washcloth, got a chair, went to the freezer and got some ice cubes, wrapped it up in the washcloth. Got my sister, put it on my sister's nose, the way that we would stop my nosebleeds. And I got her nosebleed under control. Looked around, and I said, what? WTF? I'm trying not to curse on these things. And basically, my grandmother was kind of like, I don't know what she was saying, to be honest with you. I didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense. So, being the resourceful child I was, I wanted to go call my father because I knew my father was always in the store. I knew the number. My mother made sure we always knew the phone numbers. So I take the chair, I drag the chair over to the black phone on the kitchen wall, and I start dialing. And my grandmother starts yelling at me, like, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to call Daddy. She goes, don't bother him, or something to that effect, and pulled me away from the phone and pulled the chair away. Two things: a challenge, being told what to do. I still didn't know what the hell was going on. Now, this was a Friday. It was a camp day, day camp day. Being a Friday, is we needed our white camp, Castle Hill day camp shirts. You saw that in the picture. We needed our lunches because we didn't eat camp food. We were very picky eaters, and we certainly weren't going to eat a hot lunch, that they made. And so my mother always made us our sandwiches and lunches and everything. So I had to know what to do. It was like, no one told us. No one told us. So I wait, until my grandmother goes in another room or whatever. She goes in, my sister, I don't know. Well, I know is I grab the chair again, go over to the wall, get the phone, dial my father. Father picks up. By the way, it was a phone booth that we called. My father didn't have actual phones that they paid for. They had 3 telephone booths. And I called JE69040, which was the main phone booth number. The other one was 9041. And I got my father, and he told me, oh, Mommy went to the hospital to have a baby. Okay. Your lunches are in the refrigerator. Your clothes are in the living room, laid out in the living room. Get dressed, get your sister and you dressed, have breakfast, and go to camp. That's all I needed. I just needed to know what was going on. So I looked in the refrigerator. Our lunches were there with our names on them like they were supposed to be. Our clothes was in the living room. Our camp shirts were washed, ready to go because you had to wear them on Friday. And we ate our breakfast. I think in those days I had a cereal, not with milk, God forbid, because that would be normal. My mother would buy the frozen strawberries in those little containers, and they'd be defrosted. So I take the strawberries and the juice that came with the strawberries, and that was my that was my cereal. I don't remember what Susan ate. Anyway, so the two of us we ate, we got dressed, we had our baths probably the night before, and we went to camp. And we had a normal day at camp, and we came home on the bus. Completely forgot what the hell was going on. And then I saw my grandmother and her, I guess old people ought to sort of like accumulate together. Here was an old woman who didn't live in the neighborhood, and suddenly there was a bunch of other old women around her. But actually, they were the neighborhood women. When I say old, it's very possible that I am now older than she was then. But so I come off the bus, and they all told me that I had a brother. I said, cool. I figured, all right, good. That's kind of what I wanted. What's his name? They told me his name was David. I said, that's good. I said, so what's for dinner? That was it. And then, then I don't remember everything that would happen. I know that we couldn't see my mother in the hospital. They weren't allowing children in hospitals. So I think on Sunday when my father was off, don't forget my father couldn't take time off to go be with my mother. It wasn't like that in those days. They brought me to the hospital. I believe it was in Washington Heights, I think. And, my mother might have been on the 8th or 9th floor. And, Susan and I waved to some woman who was waving to us through a window. And about a week later, they came home with David. And, wanting a brother was a great idea, and I got one, except I didn't realize they were going to plop him in my room. So suddenly, one day I came home from camp, and there was a big crib in the middle of my room with David in it. And Susan and I, dragged in our little chairs. We all had those little chairs, and we dragged them in, and they kept the room, dark and cool. I guess I thought he was a mushroom, and we sat there and we watched him. And if he moved or moved an arm or anything, we oh mom, David moved, and it was a big deal, and all those years later, in the hospital room, at the end, I probably was sitting there with Susan at some point, or Susan, Lori, me, and Paul, or whatever combination of people. But I remember sitting there, and I remember, you know, hoping he'd move as an infant, and it was being excited. And we were sitting there watching him laying there in a medicated coma, hoping he'd move then too. I remembered it. I don't recall if I said anything about it that day or afterwards. I'm not sure if that was a thought I kept in my head or not. But I do remember thinking it, and I think about it all the time now. I remember him laying there and hoping he'd move. He didn't. But anyway, that's the story I just wanted to tell. It was really kind of it was more. I meant it more as kind of a funny story than a sad story. Don't take the sadness out of it, because things are what they are, and you can't change them. All you could do is try to remember the good and remember the fun, and remember what was going on in those days. P.S. My grandmother never left, so that's why I used to call them the twins. I got them both on the same day, David and Dora. Anyway, this is Jeff Talks, which is just like Fun with Flags, only different. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.